He left his pregnant wife, alone in a hospital room. No explanation. No goodbye. Just walked away. But what he didn't know was that someone very powerful was about to step in. Stay with me, because what happened in that hospital room should have ended her story, but instead, it exposed his. The monitor beeped in a slow, uneven rhythm, the kind that made nurses glance twice before walking faster, the kind that made silence feel heavier than sound. Emily Carter lay back against stiff white sheets, one hand gripping the rail, the other pressed gently against her stomach as if she could calm both herself and the life inside her at the same time. 8 months pregnant, alone under fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead, she kept her eyes on the door. Waiting. Hoping. Counting seconds like they meant something. Footsteps approached, paused, then continued past. Not him. Not yet. Her breathing tightened, not panic, not quite, but something close, something colder. Just an hour earlier, Daniel Whitmore had stood exactly where that door now stood closed, perfectly composed in his tailored suit, checking his watch more than he looked at her. He had said it was complicated. That timing wasn't right, that the doctors would handle everything. His words had sounded expensive. Empty, but expensive. Emily blinked, trying to hold on to what mattered, steady breath in, steady breath out, but the memory wouldn't loosen its grip. The way he had stepped back instead of forward. The way he had avoided touching her. The way he had already decided something she hadn't yet understood. A nurse entered briefly, adjusted a monitor, offered a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, then left just as quickly. The door clicked shut again. Silence returned. Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the water cups sitting untouched beside her. Her phone lay face down on the tray table, a single missed call notification glowing faintly before dimming again. She hadn't turned it over. Not yet. Because once she did, everything would become real. Another minute passed. Then another. The hallway outside carried distant voices, wheels rolling, announcements overhead, life moving forward just feet away while hers seemed suspended in place. She shifted slightly, wincing not from pain, but from the weight of uncertainty pressing deeper with every passing second. Then it happened. The door opened again. For a brief moment, hope surged, quick, irrational, unstoppable. But it wasn't Daniel. It was a clerk holding a clipboard, voice neutral, almost rehearsed. Ms. Carter, we need you to review and sign a few forms. Emily nodded slowly, though her hands didn't move right away. Forms. Paper. Decisions written in ink that didn't feel like hers. She took the pen, hesitated, then glanced once more at the door, just in case, just one last time. Nothing. Only the faint reflection of herself in the glass. Pale. Tired. Still waiting. She lowered her gaze, and that's when she saw it, her phone lighting up again. Same contact. Same name she hadn't seen in years. Ethan. Her twin brother. The screen dimmed before she could react. But something had already shifted. Because somewhere far from that hospital room, in a place she hadn't thought about in a long time, someone had just noticed that call, and he wasn't the kind of man who ignored things twice. The pen felt heavier than it should have, as if the simple act of signing her name carried consequences far beyond the thin stack of paper in front of her. Emily Carter stared at the first line, her vision drifting in and out of focus, not from exhaustion but from the quiet realization that no one was going to stop this moment for her. The clerk shifted slightly, polite but impatient, trained to keep things moving. It just confirms financial responsibility, he said, his tone neutral, practiced, distant. Financial responsibility. The words echoed longer than they should have. Emily swallowed and lowered the pen to the page, her hand unsteady, her signature slower than usual, each letter forming like it did not quite belong to her anymore. Somewhere in the hallway, a phone rang. A cart rolled past. Life continued. Inside that room, everything narrowed to ink drying on paper. When she finished, the clerk took the forms without looking at her again, nodded once, and left. The door clicked shut. Silence returned, thicker this time. Emily exhaled slowly, her hand drifting back to her stomach, feeling the faint movement beneath her palm, a quiet reminder that she was not completely alone, even if it felt that way. She turned her head toward the tray table. The phone lit up again. This time, it did not dim immediately. The name stayed there. Ethan. Her breath caught. Not from fear. From memory. Years collapsed into a single second. The last conversation. The distance. The silence that followed. She had told herself it was easier that way, cleaner, less complicated. Now, staring at that name, nothing felt simple anymore. Her finger hovered over the screen, hesitating just long enough for doubt to speak. What would she even say? How do you call someone after years of absence and explain that everything has fallen apart in a single afternoon? The phone stopped ringing. The screen went dark. Emily let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding, a mixture of relief and regret tangled together. She placed the phone back down, but her hand did not move away right away. It stayed there, resting beside it, as if waiting for something she could not define. Outside the hospital, miles away, in a glass-walled office overlooking a city that never seemed to pause, Ethan Carter stood perfectly still. His phone was still in his hand, the missed call notification glowing faintly against the screen. He had not been expecting it. Not today. Not after all this time. Around him, conversations continued, assistants moved in and out, schedules shifted, but none of it seemed to reach him. He looked at the name again. Emily. For a moment, nothing changed. Then something did. Subtle. Decisive. The kind of shift that does not make noise but alters everything that follows. He set the phone down on the desk, reached for his keys, and without saying a single word to anyone around him, he walked out. Back in the hospital room, Emily leaned her head back against the pillow, closing her eyes for just a second, trying to gather whatever strength she had left. The overhead lights hummed softly. The monitor continued its steady rhythm. She did not see the moment the system updated. She did not hear the quiet notification at the nurse station down the hall. She did not know that somewhere in the building's financial system, a pending account had just been flagged, reviewed, and cleared in full. She only knew the room felt slightly different, though she could not explain why. And for the first time since the door had closed behind Daniel, the silence did not feel entirely empty. The next sound was not loud, but it carried weight, the kind that shifts attention without asking for it. The door opened again, slower this time, as if whoever stood behind it understood exactly what this moment meant. Emily did not turn right away. She had already learned what disappointment felt like tonight, and she was not ready to feel it again. But then she noticed something different. The room changed before she even saw him. The air tightened. The silence sharpened. Footsteps followed, measured and steady, each one landing with quiet certainty against the polished floor. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Controlled. Emily opened her eyes. And for a brief second she forgot how to breathe. Ethan Carter stood just inside the doorway, his presence filling the space without effort, his expression unreadable, but his gaze locked entirely on her. Years had passed, but nothing about him felt unfamiliar. The same posture. The same stillness before action. The same way he observed everything before saying a word. He did not speak immediately. He did not rush to her side. He simply looked, taking in the room, the monitors, the papers on the table, the exhaustion in her face, and something behind his eyes shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Emily's voice came out softer than she expected. You came. It was not a question. It was something closer to disbelief. Ethan stepped forward, slow, deliberate, closing the distance without hesitation. You called, he said, his tone calm, almost quiet, but there was something beneath it, something that carried more weight than the words themselves. Emily shook her head slightly. I did not. I mean, I tried, but I did not. Her words trailed off, unfinished, unnecessary. Ethan did not correct her. He did not ask for an explanation. His attention moved briefly to the chart at the foot of the bed, then to the empty chair beside her, then back to her again. always back to her. You should not be handling this alone, he said. Simple. Direct. Not judgment. Just fact. Emily let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her chest for hours. I am used to it, she replied, though even as she said it, the words sounded weaker than she wanted them to. Ethan's expression did not change, but his eyes did, sharpening just slightly, as if he had already heard everything he needed to know without her saying it. Not anymore, he said. No hesitation. No softness. Just certainty. A nurse entered the room moments later, clipboard in hand, mid-sentence before she even looked up. Ms. Carter, we need to go over your account status before. She stopped. Her eyes flicked from Emily to Ethan, then back again, confusion replacing routine. She checked the file, flipped a page, then another. That is strange, she murmured. Your account has already been fully cleared. Emily blinked. Cleared? The word felt distant, almost unreal. The nurse nodded slowly, still scanning the screen. Yes, everything has been covered. There are no outstanding charges. She looked up again, uncertain, as if waiting for someone to explain what she could not. Ethan did not look at her. He did not acknowledge the question hanging in the air. His focus remained on Emily, steady, unwavering. You can focus on what matters now, he said quietly. The nurse hesitated for a second longer, then nodded and stepped out, leaving the door slightly ajar this time. Emily turned her head toward Ethan, searching his face, trying to understand what had just happened, what he had already done without saying a single word about it. Ethan, what did you do? She asked. He did not answer right away. Instead, he pulled the chair closer to her bed and sat down, his posture relaxed but alert, like someone who had just taken position and had no intention of leaving. What I should have done a long time ago, he said. And in that moment, for the first time since the night began, Emily no longer felt like she was waiting for something to fall apart. Because something else had already started to come together. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, each second stretching into something heavier, something more deliberate, as if time itself had slowed down just to watch what would happen next. Emily Carter kept her eyes on Ethan, still trying to reconcile the man sitting beside her with the years of silence that had separated them. He had not asked questions. He had not demanded explanations. He had simply arrived, and somehow, everything around her had already begun to change. You always do that, she said quietly, her voice steadier now but still carrying the weight of everything she had been holding back. Ethan glanced at her, not confused, just waiting. You walk in like nothing can touch you, she continued, a faint, tired smile flickering for just a second before fading again. And suddenly nothing touches anyone else. Either. Ethan leaned back slightly in the chair, his gaze shifting briefly toward the window before returning to her. That is not how it works, he said, calm, measured, but there was something deeper beneath the words, something unspoken. Emily shook her head gently. It is tonight. The monitor beside her continued its steady rhythm, grounding the moment in something real, something present. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. It was not uncomfortable. It was something else. Something that felt like a pause before movement. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, his thumb moving across the screen with quiet precision. No hesitation. No wasted motion. Emily watched him, curiosity replacing confusion now. What are you doing? She asked. He did not look up right away. Closing a gap, he replied. The answer did not explain much, but it did not need to. Across the city, in a high-rise office lined with glass and steel, Daniel Whitmore stood near a conference table, mid-conversation, his voice confident, controlled, the kind that filled the room without effort. Numbers moved across a large screen behind him, projections, contracts, future plans laid out with precision. Everything exactly where he wanted it. His phone buzzed once. Then again. He ignored it at first, continuing his explanation, his tone steady. But the third vibration lingered longer. Something about it felt different. He paused, just for a second, enough for the room to notice. He picked up the phone, his eyes scanning the notification. The confidence in his posture did not disappear, but it shifted, just slightly, like a crack forming beneath polished glass. "Excuse me," he said, stepping away from the table, his voice still composed but quieter now. He moved toward the window, answering the call. "Yes?" A voice on the other end spoke quickly, urgently, words stacking on top of each other. Daniel's expression tightened, his jaw setting, his eyes narrowing as he listened. "That is not possible," he said, lower now, controlled, but the certainty was gone. Another pause. Another sentence from the other side. This time longer. More detailed. Daniel turned slightly, his reflection catching in the glass, his own image staring back at him as if asking a question he did not want to answer. "Find out who authorized it," he said sharply, the first real edge entering his voice. "I want names." The call ended. He lowered the phone slowly, his mind moving faster now, recalculating, adjusting, searching for something that made sense. But somewhere, something had already shifted beyond his reach. Back in the hospital room, Ethan set his phone down on the small table beside him, his expression unchanged, his focus returning fully to Emily. "You do not need to think about him right now," he said quietly. Emily studied his face, searching for clues, for answers, for anything that would explain the calm certainty in his voice. "I was not," she replied softly, though part of her knew that was not entirely true. Ethan did not challenge her. He simply nodded once, as if acknowledging both what she said and what she did not. "Good," he said. And in that moment, the distance between past and present felt smaller than it had just minutes ago, as if whatever had been broken before no longer mattered as much as what was happening now. The room felt steadier now, but not quieter, not in the way silence usually meant peace. This was a different kind of stillness, the kind that comes right before something shifts again. Emily adjusted slightly against the pillows, her hand resting over her stomach, feeling the subtle movement beneath her palm, grounding her in something real, something that did not depend on anyone else's decisions. Ethan watched her without making it obvious, his attention moving between her and the details around the room, always assessing, always calculating what mattered next. "You should have told me," he said after a moment, his voice calm but carrying weight that had nothing to do with volume. Emily let out a small breath, her eyes drifting toward the ceiling lights before returning to him. "I thought I had everything under control," she replied, her tone honest but tired, as if even she no longer believed that version of events. Ethan did not interrupt. He waited. That had always been his way, not pushing, just allowing truth to surface on its own. "And then today happened," she added, quieter now. The words lingered between them, heavier than the silence that followed. Ethan leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his posture relaxed but deliberate. "Today showed you something," he said. Emily frowned faintly. "What?" He held her gaze steady, unflinching. "Who stays?" he answered simply. The clarity of it settled over her in a way she had not expected, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just precise. Emily looked down for a second, absorbing it, then nodded once, slowly. Before she could respond, the door opened again, this time with more urgency, a doctor stepping in, tablet in hand, his expression professional but alert. "Ms. Carter, we are going to move you to a more specialized room," he said, his tone efficient but noticeably more attentive than before. Emily blinked. "A different room?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, a private suite on the upper floor. We want to make sure you are as comfortable as possible moving forward." His eyes briefly flicked toward Ethan, recognition flashing for a split second before he masked it again. Ethan did not react, did not acknowledge it, but the shift was undeniable. Emily glanced between them, confusion returning but softer now, less frightening. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," the doctor replied quickly. "This is precautionary. You and the baby are stable. We just want to provide the best care available." The phrasing was careful, but the meaning was clear enough. Everything had changed again. Within minutes, nurses entered, more than before, moving with coordinated precision, adjusting equipment, preparing her for transfer. The energy in the room lifted, faster, more focused, like a system suddenly operating at full capacity. Emily watched it all, her mind trying to keep up with the pace of change, her eyes returning again and again to Ethan as if he were the only constant in a shifting environment. "You did this," she said quietly, not accusing, just stating what she was beginning to understand. Ethan stood as they prepared the bed, stepping aside to give space, but never leaving her line of sight. "You need it better," he replied, his voice even, as if the answer required no further explanation. Downstairs, in a secure office near the hospital administration wing, a supervisor stared at a screen filled with financial data that no longer matched what it had just an hour ago. Accounts reclassified. Authorizations overridden. Payment sources verified at levels far beyond standard clearance. The kind of changes that did not happen unless someone with significant reach had made them happen. She picked up the phone, hesitated, then dialed a number she rarely used. "We have a situation," she said when the line connected. "And I think it is bigger than we thought." Back upstairs, the bed began to move, rolling smoothly toward the hallway, the ceiling lights passing overhead one by one, marking each second of transition. Emily's grip tightened slightly on the side rail, not from fear, but from the awareness that nothing about her situation was the same as it had been just an hour ago. Ethan walked beside her, matching her pace without effort, his presence steady, unshaken. And as the elevator doors opened ahead of them, reflecting both of their images in the polished metal, it became clear that whatever had started in that quiet hospital room was no longer contained there. It was expanding, reaching further, touching places neither of them had spoken about yet. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, sealing Emily and Ethan inside a space that felt suspended between where she had been and whatever was coming next. The movement upward was smooth, almost too smooth, as if the building itself had decided to cooperate. Emily watched the numbers light up one by one, each floor passing like a quiet confirmation that she was no longer in the same place, not physically, and not otherwise. Ethan stood beside her, one hand resting lightly against the rail, his posture relaxed but grounded, the kind of presence that did not shift with circumstance. "You always move fast," Emily said softly, her eyes still on the glowing panel. Ethan glanced at her briefly. "I move when it matters," he replied. The answer was simple, but it carried a precision that left no room for doubt. The elevator slowed, then stopped. The doors opened to a different world. The lighting was softer here, warmer, designed to comfort rather than manage. The hallway was quieter, the floors polished, the air carrying a faint scent of something clean and expensive. A nurse was already waiting, her posture attentive, her tone respectful in a way that felt intentional. "Miss Carter, we have your suite ready," she said, stepping aside to guide them forward. Suite. The word lingered in Emily's mind as she was wheeled down the hallway, past closed doors and quiet rooms, each step reinforcing the shift she was still trying to understand. The new room was larger, brighter, with a window that stretched nearly from floor to ceiling, revealing a view of the city lights beginning to flicker on as evening settled in. It did not feel like the place she had started the night in. It felt removed, elevated, like a different version of reality. The bed was positioned carefully, equipment arranged neatly, everything prepared before she even arrived. As the nurses transferred her, adjusting monitors and settling her into place, Emily's eyes moved across the room, taking in the details, the space, the difference. "This is not necessary," she said quietly, though her voice carried less resistance than the words suggested. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze following hers briefly before returning to her face. "It is," he said, calm, certain, leaving no space for argument. The nurses finished their adjustments and stepped back, offering polite reassurances before exiting, closing the door gently behind them. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It felt contained, controlled, like something being held in place. Emily shifted slightly, her hand again finding the steady rhythm beneath her palm. "You changed everything in less than an hour," she said, not looking at him this time, her focus drifting toward the window where the city stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Ethan remained standing for a moment, then pulled the chair closer again, taking his place beside her as if it had already been decided. "No," he said quietly. "I removed what should not have been there." Emily turned her head, studying him more carefully now, trying to understand the boundaries of what he meant. "And him?" she asked, the word barely more than a breath. Ethan's expression did not harden, but something in his eyes became sharper, more focused. "He made his choices," he replied. "Now the results will follow." The words settled into the room with a quiet finality. Down in the city, far from the calm of that hospital suite, Daniel Whitmore stood in his office once more, but the control he had held earlier was no longer intact. Screens that once displayed clean projections now showed alerts, discrepancies, interruptions that did not resolve no matter how many times he checked them. Calls were not being returned. Messages were delayed. Something invisible had begun to interfere, subtle but undeniable. He paced once across the room, then stopped, staring at the reflection in the glass again, as if it might offer an answer this time. But it did not. Back in the suite, Emily exhaled slowly, her body beginning to relax in ways she had not allowed herself to feel earlier. The fear had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer about being alone. Because she was not. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, his presence steady, unshaken, his attention never drifting far from her. And as the city lights grew brighter outside the window, one by one, it became clear that whatever was unfolding was not random, it was deliberate, and it had only just begun. The city lights outside the window formed a quiet pattern, steady and distant, like a reminder that life continued everywhere else without interruption, without hesitation, without knowing what had just begun to shift inside that hospital room. Emily Carter rested back against the pillows, her breathing slower now, more controlled, but her mind was anything but still. Every second since Ethan had arrived replayed in fragments, each moment connecting into something she had not expected, something she was still trying to understand. "Why now?" she asked softly, her eyes still on the glass, watching reflections instead of the city itself. Ethan did not answer immediately. He rarely did when the question mattered. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped loosely, his gaze lowering for just a moment as if aligning thought with intention. "Because you needed me now," he said. The answer was simple, but it was not complete. Emily turned her head slowly, studying him, searching for what he was not saying. "You could have come before," she replied, not accusing, just stating something that had always existed between them. Ethan met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "You did not ask before," he said. The words settled differently than she expected. Not defensive. Not distant. Just precise. Emily looked down at her hands, absorbing it, feeling the truth in a way that was both uncomfortable and grounding at the same time. "I thought I had to handle everything myself," she admitted quietly. Ethan nodded once, as if he had already known. "You thought wrong," he said, not harsh, not cold, just final. The monitor beside her continued its steady rhythm, a quiet counterpoint to the weight of the conversation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt different now, not empty, not uncertain, but filled with things that no longer needed to be said out loud. Then Ethan's phone vibrated once against the table. He glanced at it, his expression unchanged, but his focus sharpened instantly. He picked it up, reading the message in a single glance. Emily watched him, her instincts telling her something had shifted again. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan set the phone back down carefully, as if the action itself required intention. "He is reacting," he said. Emily's brow tightened slightly. "Reacting to what?" Ethan leaned back, his gaze returning to her, calm but carrying something deeper beneath the surface. "To consequences," he replied. The word lingered. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore stood alone now, his office empty, the earlier meeting dismissed without explanation. The screens in front of him displayed more than just numbers now. Flags. Reviews. Notifications from institutions that did not usually move this quickly. His assistant had stopped knocking after the third attempt. Calls from partners were now questions instead of confirmations. He tapped his phone again, dialing another number, his patience thinner, his voice sharper when the line connected. "I do not care how it happened," he said, pacing slowly across the room. "I want it reversed." There was a pause on the other end. Then a response. Short. Firm. Final. Daniel stopped moving. Completely. The kind of stillness that only comes when control is no longer guaranteed. "Then find another way," he said, quieter now, but the certainty had shifted. When the call ended, he remained where he stood, staring at the darkened reflection in the glass, as if it no longer belonged to him. Back in the hospital suite, Emily exhaled slowly, her hand again resting over the steady life beneath her palm, grounding herself in something that could not be negotiated, could not be manipulated, could not be taken away. "This is because of you," she said softly, her voice not questioning this time. Ethan did not deny it. He did not confirm it either. He simply looked at her, steady, unwavering. "This is because of choices," he said. And in that moment, the distance between cause and effect no longer felt abstract. It felt immediate. Real. And just beginning to unfold. The city outside continued to glow, but inside the room, the light felt different now, softer, more focused, as if everything unnecessary had been stripped away, leaving only what mattered. Emily Carter shifted slightly, her breathing even, her body beginning to settle into the kind of stillness that only comes after chaos has passed but before the outcome is fully known. Her eyes moved from the window back to Ethan, studying him with a clarity that had not been there before. "You said consequences," she began, her voice steady but thoughtful. "But consequences do not just appear out of nowhere." Ethan did not respond immediately. He reached for the glass of water on the table, placed it closer to her within easy reach, then leaned back into the chair again, his movements precise, deliberate, never rushed. "No," he said after a moment. "They do not." Emily watched him, waiting. The pause stretched just long enough to carry weight. "Then what did you do?" she asked. This time, there was no hesitation in her voice. Only quiet determination. Ethan met her gaze, his expression unchanged, but something in his posture shifted slightly, as if he had decided she was ready for part of the answer. "I made sure the truth was no longer optional," he said. The words settled slowly, like something unfolding layer by layer. Emily frowned faintly. "What truth?" Ethan's eyes moved briefly toward the tablet resting on the counter near the wall, then back to her. "The kind that is usually hidden behind paperwork," he replied. "Financial structures. Timing of transfers. Decisions made before today that were supposed to look like they happened after." Emily's breath caught, not sharply, but enough to break her rhythm. Pieces began to connect, incomplete but forming something recognizable. "You mean, he planned this?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Ethan did not soften the answer. "He prepared for outcomes that benefited him," he said. "He assumed no one would question how those outcomes were created." The room felt smaller for a moment, not physically, but emotionally, as if the weight of what was being revealed had narrowed the space between them. Emily looked down, her hand resting over her stomach again, grounding herself in the one thing that had not changed. "And now?" she asked. Ethan's expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened slightly, focused in a way that suggested forward motion rather than reflection. "Now those preparations are visible," he said. "To people who are paid to care when things do not align." Across the city, Daniel Whitmore stood at his desk, a different kind of silence surrounding him now. Not controlled. Not intentional. The kind that follows when systems stop responding the way they are supposed to. A new message appeared on his screen. Then another. Requests for clarification. Notices of review. Temporary holds placed on accounts that had never been questioned before. He picked up his phone again, dialing faster this time, his composure thinning with each unanswered ring. I need this handled immediately, he said when someone finally answered, his voice sharper, less measured. This should not even be happening. The response on the other end was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that does not bend under pressure. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then escalate it, he snapped. Another pause. Another answer. This time, longer. More detailed. Daniel's hand lowered slowly, the phone still pressed to his ear, but his focus shifting, recalculating, realizing something he had not considered before. Not everything could be reversed. Back in the hospital suite, Emily lifted her gaze again, her expression no longer uncertain, but not fully resolved either. You are not just fixing things, she said quietly. You are exposing them. Ethan did not deny it. He did not confirm it. He simply held her gaze steady, unwavering. There is a difference between protection and silence, he said. Tonight you do not need silence. The words settled into the space between them, not loud, not forceful, but undeniable. Emily exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, as if something inside her had shifted from survival to understanding. Outside the window, the city lights stretched endlessly, each one representing a story, a decision, a consequence waiting to unfold. And inside that room, for the first time, Emily was no longer waiting to see what would happen next. She was beginning to understand why it would. The silence in the room no longer felt like something waiting to break, it felt like something building, quiet but deliberate, like a tide that had already turned even if the surface still looked calm. Emily Carter shifted slightly, her fingers tracing the edge of the blanket absent-mindedly, her thoughts no longer scattered but aligning into something sharper, something more aware. If they can see it now, she said slowly, her eyes lifting toward Ethan again. Then it was always there. Ethan nodded once, the smallest confirmation, but enough. It was always there, he repeated. It just needed the right moment to be looked at the right way. Emily let that settle, the weight of it changing how she viewed everything that had happened, not just tonight, but the months before, the small details she had ignored, the explanations she had accepted without question. And you knew, she said. It was not an accusation. It was recognition. Ethan did not look away. I suspected, he replied. But suspicion is not enough. It does not move systems. It does not trigger reviews. It does not create accountability. Emily exhaled slowly, her hand resting again over her stomach, grounding herself as the realization deepened. So you waited, she said. Ethan's gaze shifted briefly toward the window, then back to her. I waited for the point where the truth could not be dismissed, he said. Tonight reached that point. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore stood at the center of a room that no longer responded to him the way it had just hours earlier. His phone lit up again, this time with a different kind of message, not internal, not from his team, but external. A formal notification. A request for documentation. Immediate. Non-negotiable. He read it once, then again, as if repetition might change the meaning. It did not. His reflection in the glass behind the screen looked unfamiliar now, not because it had changed, but because the certainty behind it had. He moved quickly, opening files, checking timestamps, reviewing transfers that had once felt invisible, protected, structured in a way that ensured they would never surface. But now they were not invisible. They were being questioned. Each detail that had once been an advantage was becoming something else entirely. He picked up his phone again, dialing with urgency that was no longer controlled. I need legal on this immediately, he said the moment the call connected. Everything. Now. The response on the other end was measured, slower than he wanted, careful in a way that suggested distance rather than support. Daniel's grip tightened slightly, not visibly, but enough to change the way he held the device. Do not tell me to wait, he said, his voice lower now, sharper, the edge no longer hidden. But even as he spoke, something in the tone of the conversation made it clear that waiting was no longer his choice. Back in the hospital suite, Emily looked at Ethan with a different kind of clarity now, one that came from understanding rather than confusion. This was not just about helping me tonight, she said. Quietly. Ethan did not interrupt. He waited, as he always did. This was about making sure he could not pretend this never happened, she continued. Ethan held her gaze steady, unwavering. People like him rely on distance, he said. Distance from consequences. Distance from visibility. Distance from anyone who would question the timing of their decisions. Emily nodded slowly, the pieces aligning fully now. And you removed that distance, she said. Ethan did not answer with words this time. He did not need to. The silence that followed carried the confirmation more clearly than anything he could have said. The monitor beside her continued its steady rhythm, each beat reinforcing the present, the reality that she was still here, still moving forward, still in control of something that could not be taken from her. Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly, but inside the room, the focus had narrowed to something far more precise. Because for the first time, the story was no longer about what had been done to her. It was about what would now be done in response. The room held steady, but the pressure inside it had changed, no longer quiet and uncertain, but focused, like something aligning into place with purpose. Emily Carter shifted slightly, her gaze fixed on the city beyond the glass, but her thoughts were no longer drifting. They were connecting. Every word Ethan had said, every action he had taken, every silence he had allowed to exist between them now carried meaning that she could finally see clearly. So what happens next? She asked, her voice calm but direct, no hesitation left in it now. Ethan did not answer right away. He stood, moving toward the window, his reflection joining the city lights for a brief moment before he turned back to her. Next is not about reaction, he said. It is about exposure. The words settled differently this time. Not abstract. Not distant. Immediate. Emily watched him carefully. Exposure to who? She asked. Ethan met her gaze steady as ever. To the people who decide outcomes, he replied. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore stood at his desk, but the environment around him no longer felt like his domain. The calls had changed. The tone had changed. Where there had once been agreement, there was now distance. Where there had once been certainty, there were now questions. His legal team was no longer reassuring him. They were asking him for clarification. Documentation. Timelines. He paced once, then stopped, staring at the files open across his screens, each one now carrying weight it had not carried before. We can manage this, he said into the phone, but the confidence in his voice no longer matched the words. The response on the other end was slower this time, more careful. We need to understand the full scope first, the voice said. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. You already do, he replied. But even as he said it, he knew that was no longer true. Back in the hospital suite, Emily adjusted slightly, her hand again resting over the steady rhythm beneath her palm, her breathing even, her focus sharper than it had been all night. You are not just showing what he did, she said slowly. You are making sure he cannot explain it away. Ethan nodded once. Explanation requires time, he said. And time requires control. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly as the implication settled in. And he does not have that anymore, she said. Ethan did not respond with words, but the silence confirmed everything. The monitor beside her continued its steady rhythm, a quiet anchor in a moment that was no longer uncertain. For the first time, Emily was not thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what had been taken from her, and how it was being brought into the light. A soft knock came at the door, followed by a nurse stepping inside, her tone respectful, her posture more attentive than before. Ms. Carter, everything is ready for the next stage of monitoring, she said. The doctor will be here shortly to go over the plan. Emily nodded, her attention briefly shifting, then returning to Ethan as the nurse stepped back out. You planned this quickly, she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he replied. I prepared for the possibility. Emily studied him, understanding deepening with each passing second. You always do, she said quietly. Ethan did not deny it. He simply remained where he was, steady, present, unshaken by the movement happening beyond the walls of that room. Outside, the city continued to glow, but inside, something far more precise was unfolding. Because what had started as a moment of abandonment had already transformed into something else entirely. Not chaos. Not reaction. But direction. And for the first time, Emily was not waiting for someone to decide her outcome. She was watching as the outcome began to take shape around her. The knock that followed was softer than before, but it carried more authority, the kind that signaled a shift not just in procedure, but in importance. The door opened without hesitation this time, and a senior physician stepped in, his posture straight, his expression focused but respectful in a way that acknowledged more than just a patient in the room. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice calm, measured, "we are going to review your condition and discuss the next steps to ensure everything progresses safely." Emily nodded, her attention steady, no longer overwhelmed by the pace of change but moving with it now, understanding that every action had purpose. The doctor continued, explaining in clear terms the monitoring plan, the adjustments being made, the additional resources now available to her. There were no rushed words, no vague reassurances, only precise information delivered with intention. Ethan remained beside her, silent, listening, his presence unchanged, but the effect of it unmistakable in how the conversation unfolded. When the doctor finished, he paused briefly, then added, "You are in a very strong position now. We will make sure it stays that way." The phrasing was careful, but it carried meaning beyond medical care. Emily caught it. So did Ethan. The doctor nodded once more and stepped out, the door closing gently behind him. For a moment, the room returned to quiet, but it was no longer the kind of quiet that waited for uncertainty. It was the kind that followed clarity. Emily exhaled slowly, her hand resting over her stomach, feeling the steady movement beneath, anchoring her in something real and unshakable. "Even they know something has changed," she said quietly. Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "People who understand systems recognize when something shifts," he replied. "They do not always know why, but they know when it matters." Emily nodded, absorbing it, her thoughts no longer circling around what had happened earlier, but moving forward, aligning with what was unfolding now. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore stood in front of a different kind of conversation. His legal team was now fully engaged, screens filled with documents, timelines, transaction records that were being reviewed not just internally, but by external parties with authority that could not be redirected. "We need to prepare for formal inquiry," one voice said through the speaker, calm but direct. Daniel's expression tightened slightly, his control slipping in small, nearly invisible ways. "This is temporary," he replied. "It will stabilize." But even as he spoke, another notification appeared, then another, each one reinforcing the same reality. This was not stabilizing. This was expanding. He moved to the window, looking out over the city that had always reflected his sense of control, but tonight it felt different, distant, less responsive to him than it had been just hours before. Back in the hospital suite, Emily looked toward Ethan again, her expression no longer searching, but certain in a way that had not existed before. "You did not just protect me," she said slowly. "You changed the direction of everything connected to him." Ethan did not deny it. He did not confirm it. He simply met her gaze, steady, unwavering. "Direction changes when pressure is applied at the right point," he said. Emily let out a quiet breath, understanding settling deeper now, not overwhelming, but clear. "And there is no way back for him from that point," she said. Ethan's silence answered more than words could. The monitor beside her continued its steady rhythm, each beat reinforcing the present, the reality that she was no longer reacting to events, she was witnessing their consequences unfold. Outside, the city lights stretched endlessly, but inside that room, the focus had narrowed to something far more precise. Because what had begun as a moment of loss had already transformed into something else entirely. Not just recovery. Not just protection. but a shift in balance that could not be reversed once it had begun. The night had settled fully outside the window now, the city no longer transitioning but steady in its rhythm, lights fixed in place like quiet witnesses to everything unfolding beyond their reach. Inside the room, the atmosphere had changed again, not through movement, but through understanding. Emily Carter rested against the pillows, her posture no longer tense, her breathing even, her thoughts no longer racing ahead or circling backward. They were present. Focused. Clear. She looked at Ethan, not searching this time, not questioning, but recognizing something she had not allowed herself to see before. "You knew this would not stop with tonight," she said softly. Ethan did not look surprised by the statement. He simply met her gaze steady as always. "Nothing like this ever does," he replied. Emily nodded slowly, her fingers resting lightly over the steady light beneath her hand, grounding her in something that could not be altered by any external force. "So this continues," she said. Ethan's eyes shifted briefly toward the window, then back to her. "It resolves," he corrected. The distinction was small, but it carried weight. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore sat at his desk now, no longer pacing, no longer calling, but reading. Line by line. Document by document. What had once been routine now required scrutiny. Every transaction. Every transfer. Every decision made in anticipation of outcomes that had seemed certain at the time. His legal team spoke in measured tones, outlining scenarios, preparing responses, but the confidence that had once defined those conversations was no longer present. "We are moving into formal review territory," one voice said through the speaker. "This will require full transparency." Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the screen, his expression controlled, but the stillness in him was no longer strength. It was calculation. Reassessment. A recognition that the ground beneath him had shifted in ways that could not simply be corrected. Back in the hospital suite, Emily adjusted slightly, the soft fabric of the blanket moving with her, the room responding in quiet ways to every small motion. "He thought he had already secured the outcome," she said, her voice thoughtful now, analytical in a way that reflected her clarity. Ethan nodded once. "He positioned himself for it," he said. "But positioning is not the same as certainty." Emily let out a slow breath, the truth of that settling deeply. "And now he has to answer for every step that led there," she said. Ethan did not respond with words. He did not need to. The silence that followed carried confirmation more clearly than anything spoken. A soft movement at the door drew Emily's attention. A nurse entered briefly, checking monitors, adjusting a setting, her demeanor calm but attentive, her awareness of the room heightened in a way that reflected its importance. "Everything looks stable," she said with a small nod, then stepped back out, leaving the door slightly open this time. Emily watched the door for a moment, then turned back to Ethan. "It feels different," she said quietly. Ethan's gaze remained steady. "It is different," he replied. Emily studied him, understanding no longer forming, but settling into place. "Not because things are fixed," she continued, "but because they are no longer hidden." Ethan inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the precision of her words. "Exactly," he said. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, but inside that room, the scope of everything had narrowed to something far more controlled. Because what had once been a situation defined by uncertainty was now defined by visibility. And visibility, once established, did not fade. It expanded. It reached further. It forced every part of the truth into the light. Emily rested back, her eyes closing for just a moment, not from exhaustion, but from a quiet sense of resolution beginning to take shape. And beside her, Ethan remained exactly where he had been since he arrived, steady, present, and unmoved by anything except what mattered. Because the outcome was no longer a question of what might happen. It was a process already in motion, one that would continue until every piece had reached its place. Morning arrived quietly, not with noise or urgency, but with light, soft and steady, filtering through the tall window and stretching across the room in long, gentle lines. Emily Carter opened her eyes slowly, the shift from night to day marking more than just time passing. It marked distance. Distance from the moment everything had begun to fall apart, and distance towards something else entirely. The monitor beside her continued its calm rhythm, unchanged, reliable, constant in a way that grounded everything else around it. She turned her head slightly, her gaze moving across the room until it settled where it always did now. Ethan was still there. In the same chair. In the same position. Unmoved. Not asleep, not distracted, just present. As if the hours between night and morning had not mattered to him at all. "You did not leave," she said softly, her voice carrying the quiet realization rather than surprise. Ethan looked up, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "There was no reason to," he replied. The simplicity of the answer carried more weight than anything else could have. Emily let out a slow breath, her hand instinctively resting over her stomach, feeling the steady, reassuring movement beneath her palm. "Everything feels different," she said. Ethan nodded once, not questioning the statement, only acknowledging it. "Because it is," he said. There was no elaboration. There did not need to be. Across the city, Daniel Whitmore stood in a conference room that no longer felt like his own. The people around the table were not there to agree with him anymore. They were there to assess, to question, to review. Documents were projected onto the screen, each one examined with careful attention, each detail now carrying consequences it had never been meant to carry. "We will need a full account of these decisions," one of them said, their tone measured but firm. Daniel remained standing, his posture controlled, his expression composed, but the authority that once defined him no longer commanded the room in the same way. "You will have it," he replied. The words were correct. The tone was not. Because for the first time, the outcome was no longer his to define. Back in the hospital suite, Emily shifted slightly, the morning light illuminating her face in a way that made the exhaustion of the night before feel distant, almost unreal. "What happens when all of this is finished?" she asked quietly. Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze steady, thoughtful for just a moment before answering. "It does not finish all at once," he said. "It settles." Emily considered that, her eyes drifting